Alrighty. So if you cannot see my Vantaca dashboard, please let me know. Should be able to see my mouse moving around on the screen. Awesome. Alrighty, so today I'm going to take you through how to process an invoice from coding an invoice all the way through paying it. We're briefly going to talk about your service provider list. And yeah, let's go ahead and jump right to it. So there are a few different ways to get an invoice into your Vantaca database. The first and most common way is going to be what you have set up under your mailroom email accounts. Under here, you guys typically will have an invoice email address of some sort that is going to be like invoices at yourcompanyname.com or something to that effect. And anytime someone emails this email address here and has a PDF attachment in it, each of those attachments is going to kick off an individual invoice action item in Vantaca. This means if you have a vendor that has a habit of sending you each page of an invoice in individual PDF files, you want to just have a conversation with them or shoot them an email and say, make sure that you consolidate all of those individual pages into one PDF file for you, because you don't want it to be kicking off page one, page two, page three is all individual invoices if that's not the case. On that same note, if you have a vendor that has a habit of sending you a PDF with 12 separate invoices that need to be paid separately, all in one PDF file, make sure that they split those up for you because Vantaca is going to see all 12 of those invoices all linked within that one PDF, and it's not going to know that they need to be paid separately unless they divide those out for you. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. At first, it can kind of be a little bit confusing if your vendors aren't doing this already, but once you kind of push them in the right direction, it'll flow pretty seamlessly and is super convenient and will just get you guys working more efficiently if that's not already the way that's being done. This is the most simple and common way for an invoice to get into Vantaca. Second option is your desktop utility app. That is found here under your mailroom desktop utility. We're not going to go into great detail there just in the interest of time, but there's a great article that just touches on the desktop utility app and the benefits and things of that nature. So if that is something that you guys have already been in talks with implementation, just decide if that's something that you want to go down that road. My opinion and opinion of most clients is this email account linking to the invoice action item is still going to be your best bet in the interest of saving you time. The third and least common way is manually entering an invoice into Vantaca. And that's what we're going to talk about today because there are some instances where you're going to need to know how to do this. So for example, let's say someone comes into your office at 4:30 on Thanksgiving Eve and you just need to get this vendor paid before you guys close for the holiday weekend. You'd probably want to enter this invoice manually. So let's go ahead and look at that here. I'm going to start out by hovering over action items and going to all action items. From this screen, it's going to take you to your all action items for the last association you were working in. But when I click new action item, I do have the ability to just select a different action item, or I mean a different association rather, if I'm not in the correct one for the invoice that I'm entering. So I can click select, and from the drop-down box, I can just select a different association and select association only. But in this example, I'm going to be entering an invoice relevant to this association here. From the drop-down box for your action type, you're going to click the letter I, which will bring you down a little bit closer to your invoice action item. And then something to note here, just kind of commit to memory, is it's going to go ahead and start out in your current step of OCR data. That's an optical reader step that we're not going to need when we're manually entering an invoice. That step just tries to read certain pieces from an invoice when it's scanned in. We need to skip that because we're manually entering this. So you're going to go ahead and use your drop down box on the current step and go down to AP complete data entry. You guys may have that labeled differently, whether it's just complete data entry or whatever you guys choose to name it. But either way, you just want to simply skip that first step and go down to whatever the very next one is. Then you're going to go down here to where it says attachments and hit the plus button, and then select files. You'll find your invoice that you're adding here. So let's see, I just added another one. Here's my fake invoice. So you'll select your real invoice, not a fake one, and upload it here. And what you're going to do next is you're going to click update and select. Not update, you want to use the update and select option because you want to grab that invoice. So we're clicking update and select to select it. And essentially what that does is just opens it up that same action item bigger on my screen. It also uploads the invoice that I just added. You'll move that over to your second screen. Hopefully you have two screens if you're the one coding these invoices. And just simply move it over to the side so you can just work back and forth pretty seamlessly. And then just work your way straight down. Make sure your association is correct. From the service provider, you'll just start typing their name in here and it'll pull up. And then add your invoice number. Something to note here is if you do have a provider that has a habit of not giving you an invoice number, that's okay. I would still recommend adding something right here as like a placeholder, whether it's the invoice date or whether it's today's date. Just come up with a kind of get on the same page as the rest of the team and make sure that you guys determine what you want to put here in the invoice number spot. So for instance, we'll just say today's date, 11/6/24, and then account number. And then just fill everything out right here on this next line. Your invoice total. And then right here, this refresh GL button is typically the button that I click next just out of habit. Whenever you click this refresh GL button, it's going to look at the last time that you used this association provider combo and pull whatever GL you used last time you paid them, and the fund, the bank account, the description. It'll pull everything down here if they've been paid. Also, what it does is it looks at in Vantaca if they have a preferred payment method set up under service providers payment method. It'll look at this. Let me just find Bob real quick. So it'll have Bob's preferred payment method. So right here we have a exception set up down here so that Dunder Mifflin always pays this provider via check. And that's going to pull in right here into this spot. So if for whatever reason it pulled in ACH right here, so if this service provider prefers to be paid via ACH and we're cutting a manual emergency check, you would just want to come down here and select it from the drop-down box. I do have the ability to split the GL if I need to. So if I just hit new item here, it will give me the ability to split the GLs right here. Just remember that you do want to click in the amount section and make sure your numbers are mathing. Cool. In this example, we're not going to split the GL. We'll just keep it simple. Cool. From this screen, a few other things just to point out. You can look at messages. So if there's any messaging that's gone on in this action item so far, there isn't, but it just shows you what's happened on this invoice so far. It just kind of gives you the cookie crumbs of where it's been. And then recent invoices, you can look at any recent invoices here just to make sure you're not double paying this. You don't need to double check this, but for whatever reason it might be, you can just check the recent invoices here and make sure that everything looks good. But once I've filled everything out, double checked my work, all I need to do is click update. I can now close out my invoice on my other screen that I was using to kind of go back and forth and copy here and make sure that everything looks good. So the reason that we went ahead and put in the placeholder in that invoice number spot, I know sometimes vendors have a habit of not giving you invoice numbers depending on who it is. Vantaca is going to screen for possible duplicates in the background. So I'm going to look at the kind of inner workings of the invoice action item and kind of go into greater detail here. So this is your invoice action item and all of how it's set up in this database. And so Vantaca is going to check for possible duplicates. And so if there's a ton of invoices being entered into your database with no invoice number, it's going to flag those as potential duplicates because that is a common denominator in all those invoices. So to save yourself time and extra work, just kind of put a placeholder in there for those invoice number slots if you can, if you remember it. And just remember to tell everybody on the team and get on the same page about what you're making that little placeholder. If Vantaga does find a possible duplicate, it will flag it and it'll notify your AP processor just to review it and double check and see what's going on there. Cool. So let's take a look at this action item that we just entered and see what's going on with it and where it's sitting right now. Just a second, let me get in the right association. Cool. Alrighty. So right now, here's our invoice. We've gone through a few steps already. This is where we manually entered it by complete data entry. In the background, just like we just talked about, we've checked for a possible duplicate. And now we're rating in the approve invoice step. And depending on how you guys have this action item set up, for me, in my database, my manager is going to be the role that is going to be approving this. Something else I do want to point out is right now to this point, we have not clicked the menu and the step button at all. I'm going to be revisiting that a few times throughout the call just to remind you. At no point in time, I know it is tempting because a lot of the other invoices you manually step using the hamburger or menu button and stepping it or approving it. And with the invoice action item, it's unique in the sense that you're always going to go to the appropriate screens to approve it and advance it along throughout its progress. And the reason is we just want to add those extra layers of security and make sure the wrong people are not approving these invoices and don't have the capabilities to see those certain screens. So for that reason, you don't manually step the invoice action item, you always go to the appropriate screens. So we're in the approve invoice step, and that lives under your accounting dropdown on the approve invoices screen. Now, sometimes you might come to the screen and not see your invoice, and it might be because you're not in the right association. So right here, I can click the association and select whatever one I'm looking for, or I can select all associations to see everything. It might make it look a little hectic right here, though. I like to keep them separated. So from our approve invoices screen, we are in the correct association, and here is our invoice. With the arrow on the left side, I can drill into it and drop it down, see my GL details. I do have one final time to come in here and click edit, and maybe if I messed up on my GLs and my coding or anything like that, I can edit it one more time, or I can add anything to my description if I need to. I can also click where the form of payment is, and I can change my form of payment. I can click in the approve amount, maybe make a partial approval. I can change my due date, which maybe there's some rare one-off instances where you might need to edit the due date if you just typed the wrong number, but I cannot edit or change the invoice date. So if I made that mistake, you'd want to avoid it and go back and start over. But if everything looks good here, I'll go ahead and click the checkbox and I'll approve selected invoices. Maybe it's the end of my day and I'm doing my just check run for the whole day. I can click the check all and select all the invoices here to be paid out and click approve selected invoices. Cool, and that's it. It's pretty basic on this screen. I want to go through a few extra across the top here. There's this complete data entry step, which for me, when I was first learning to navigate the invoice action item, I was like, well, that was my first step. What are we doing revisiting the complete data entry? And looking back at the inner workings of this action item, the step 6 here is manager complete data entry. So maybe in my AP complete data entry, I missed the GL and just left it blank. Vantaca will flag it if there's any pieces of the pie missing when the first person coded it, and it'll stop it at the step 6, manager complete data entry, and notify the manager in their my action items that, hey, they need to completely finish entering the data here. So it would show up on the approve invoices screen right here saying that it needs to finish being coded. Provider on hold is unique. This is where invoices will land if you try to pay a provider that is put on hold. So for instance, maybe their COI, their insurance is out of date, and that needs to be rectified before we can pay them. Or maybe they're a new provider and we're still getting them all entered and set up. Or maybe they got in a fist fight with the board president and we just need to make sure we handle everything with them and decide our relationship with them going forward. So this provider on hold is somewhere where whatever hold is on that provider's account does need to be rectified before you can move forward and pay them. That'll be right here. There's also a cool column header you can add here. If you click any one of these three lines across the top of any of these column headers and hover over columns, you can add hold reason, and that will tell you why that provider is on hold. Cool. Prepaid review is this last column header over here on the right side of our screen. And that is, excuse me, this is if you have any contracts set up to record payments that are made outside of Vantaca, you can set a review threshold. So maybe your cell phone bills for your company are paid via auto pay via credit card with auto pay, and you want to be notified anytime one of these bills gets too high. Obviously, these are paid outside of Vantaca, so there's really nothing Vantaca can do to stop these bills from being paid since they're on auto pay, but it's a great way to stay informed of what's going on with bills that are being paid outside of Vantaca. And that's going to be this prepaid review. Cool. Awesome. I know I've been taking you guys all over the world, but I just like to show you guys the why behind a lot of these pieces of your invoice action item. So right now, our invoice is sitting in the ready for payment step. And we've gone through a few more kind of levels of security and approval to get here. So we've checked for possible duplicates, remember? There was no possible duplicate, so it kept on moving right along. Our manager did approve this invoice. And then Vantaca had some few more hoops for it to jump through. We had to check for signature approval, and it did not meet that. So with that being said, our association settings kind of dictate what hoops this invoice had to go through and what steps it needs to stop at. So under your AP payment section in Vantaca, there's a few different restrictions you can set on an association level basis. So your electronic signature, you can set it to either stop for only checks under the signature threshold that you set up here on the signature threshold, or you can require that all checks need electronic secondary approval. You can set the threshold here if you require the threshold. You can require board approval. If yes, then it makes sure that it will always stop here and decide, okay, how many board approvals do you need and what's that threshold approval if it's above that threshold. Also, it's going to set up a duplicate check duration. And what that means is it's going to stop from flagging your things that are commonly the same amount, like month to month. So for instance, I think a good example would be my pest control is $50. I don't know, $30 or $50 a month. I don't know. I didn't set it up. My husband did. But so let's just say I get a $30 every single month bill that has that same account number, the same amount, but Vantaca would stop it as a possible duplicate if it was within this threshold right here, or this duration rather. So if I got that same $30 a month bill, but under 25 days, Vantaca is going to flag it and say, oh, no, you've already paid this once. But if it's outside of that 25-day window, Vantaca will know that it's just a reoccurring bill for that same amount, the same account number, and it's okay. You can set that to like 30 days or 31 days, whatever makes the most sense for your bills and things like that. Future pay duration is another setting. So this is a way for you to separate out bills that are not due for X amount of days. That's going to filter it over to another screen in Vantaca, or another tab rather, so that you don't have all of your invoices to be paid sitting in one spot if it's not due for 45 days or more. And I'll show you guys where that lives. But again, these are association level settings, and they can be different for all associations, or they can be the same. It's totally up to your preference. So again, our action item is sitting on the ready for payment step. It's gone through all those levels of security that we talked about. and it is going to be sitting on our accounting pay invoices screen. So this is probably going to be like your AP payroll or your AP roll that's going to be able to see this screen and determine if these are due to be paid or not, or if we are needing to decline them, maybe make a partial payment, or that we don't want to pay them. So here's Bob the Builder. Notice that if I wanted to make any adjustments to my GL, I would need to reclass it at this point. There is no way for me to make that last minute change to my GL at this point. But if everything looks good here, I can either A, decline it, or I can select it and pay selected invoices. Also, I could select all of them and pay all of them. Here is my warning tab up here at the very top. And invoices will show up here if the sum of the invoices to be paid right here will, sorry guys, let me grab a sip of water. So if there's an invoice sitting on this warning tab here, it is going to let us know if the invoice to be paid by this association will drop the bank account below the minimum Vantaca book balance, not the bank balance, but the book balance if these are to be paid. So that is set up under our association bank account screen. And when you first added your bank accounts here on this screen, there's a minimum alert. So what that means, if I had an invoice sitting due to be paid by Presidential Valley, but the invoice, if it was paid, would bring us below that $1,000 minimum alert, then it would show up on this warning tab and say, hey, be careful, if you pay this, might put you in the red. And then this future pay tab here, this is the one we were talking about that, hey, if it's not due for 45 days, we'll put it under this screen to help keep your pay now screen not totally bogged down. I'm going to pause here for just a moment, make sure we don't have any questions kind of lingering. We don't have anything in the Q&A box, but if you guys have any questions, I'm going to pause for just a moment before we move on. And if you joined us a little bit late, welcome. Just remember that Q&A box is where any of your questions, comments, outburst will go. Pausing for just a second. Anybody? Any takers before we move on? Cool. So now we're in our very last step, and all we need to do is pay this. This was an easy invoice. We didn't need any signature approvals. We didn't need any board approvals. It was easy. I believe it was $250. So nothing was holding us up in order to get this thing on and paid, luckily, since it was something we wanted to get paid with the vendor standing in front of me right now. If it did need signature approval under accounting, that signature approval screen is right here. You guys have a lot of examples in Vantaca U of different scenarios outside of what we're looking at. Just this easy, easy one to process. But make sure you get in there if you haven't already done so and get some practice in and make sure you're able to see some other scenarios with some few other kind of traffic stops or bumps along the way for invoicing. Cool. Now, if this was an ACH, VIP, or Avid Pay, that once that file has transferred to your bank or wherever it needs to go, the money has moved, this action item will automatically move itself to paid. Or since this is a check, I will need to go to the print queue, the check queue rather, and that's going to be under my mailroom check queue. And I have a few here. I think I sent quite a few over. But this is my one dated today for Mr. Bob the Builder. A neat feature that we have across the top, if you're only wanting to do checks that need an e-signature, you can click check all e-signature only, or check all that needs signature, or just check all in office. But this is the only one I need, and it's right here at the top, so I can simply check that one and simply click print. Cool. Once I click print, it's going to automatically shuffle me over in my jobs tab. See right here, it says processing on my one created today. All I need to do is click refresh and give it a few seconds until it says complete, and that's how I know it's ready to download and then print. Once it's up at the top, I'm ready to click it and simply print it. For whatever reason I ran out of ink, all I need to do is go back up to my downloads and reprint it again if I need to. Or you can always click include closed right here where you checkbox, and these are all previously printed checks. Cool. And these ones are just sitting here. They just simply haven't been downloaded yet. Once you download a check and send it up to the top, that's how you remove, or that's how they go away from the job screen right here. So again, just a reminder, from the check queue, we'll select it, then we'll click print, and it'll automatically shuffle us over to the jobs tab. But again, if it doesn't show up right away, it's okay. Just click refresh, and there it is. Cool. So if it's a lot at one time, and I know it, but if you have missed any pieces of this, the biggest piece of the pie that I want you guys to remember of everything that we've talked about on this call is there was not an instance where I went in to my action item screen and manually stepped it by clicking the hamburger menu and click step, or I never came in here and manually approved it with the drop down here. I made sure that every single step of the way I went to the appropriate screens. So I went to accounting, I went to approve invoices, I went to pay invoices, or signature approval, whatever the case may be. Or if board members were involved, they went to their board portal and made sure they approved it that way. It's huge that you guys recall that piece of information. I would say one of the highest drivers and support tickets is not properly using the invoice action item. And it's a lot. I know it's a lot to try to take everything on and remember it, but this is one piece that I want to try to continue to reiterate and make sure that we don't lose that information. So with that being said, there is never a time where you will click step within that action item and step it to paid. That's just not how the action item functions. It needs to go through the appropriate screens in order for it to actually get paid out. So always, always go to the appropriate pages to move this action item along. If you step it in error, it would actually leave the check queue and be recorded as paid, but not actually pay your vendor. So very important to remember these bits and pieces of information. I do know that some of you guys on this call might be avid Strongroom or avid invoice users. And so again, this is just manually processing an invoice for a vendor in front of you. Avid invoicing and all of that training, if it hasn't already come through, you guys will work with them directly as well as your consultant to just kind of go over the logistics if you're new to Avid. But in the actual invoice action item itself, there's a few steps that are baked in here that are added. So the way it works is this integration is going to give Vantaca certain amounts of information along the way. So everything you do in Avid or Strongroom needs to happen in those softwares, from coding it to approving it to voiding it. If you're using regular Strongroom, then everything needs to happen there. We're going to pass them certain pieces of information like vendor information, bank account info, GL information, and that's all. And then Strongroom or Avid, they're going to give us certain pieces of information like updates about your invoice so that we can make sure that all the information is lining up in Vantaca and in their software. The first time we even know that you have an invoice is when they're complete on their end. Then the next time we're notified is when it's paid. We'll create a bank register item. And if it's voided in Strongroom, then we'll also be notified as well. All of these things happen overnight. So we are not going to know if something happened today until tomorrow. So keep that in mind as well. Sometimes you may see that something's done in one software and not visible in Vantaca yet. And that's just because the communication happens overnight. Cool. No questions there. I'm going to go ahead and keep moving on. But again, just know that Q&A box is always open. Next thing we're going to talk about is service providers. When you click on service providers or hover over the service providers and click the list, it's always going to take you to your service provider list. In Vantaca, you may already know, this is a global list. There are no association-specific providers. You can always add new providers to your screen here. If you need to edit an existing service provider, so maybe Bob the Builder has changed some things, you would click edit here. Maybe they were on hold. This is where you would go to remove or add the hold, and the hold reason goes right here below. And that's about it. If you have now, I always recommend if you haven't already given us your service provider list, go through and audit it very well. Try to eliminate any duplicates that you might have before you get it in. Cleaning it up outside of Vantaca is nice just because it takes away from double work once it gets inside of Vantaca. The other thing too is your primary means of communication with service providers is via email. So campaign for those email addresses so hard so that you just saves yourself time on the back end. Email addresses is how you let them know they're, hey, your insurance is about to run out and we need that updated on our end to make sure we can keep you paid and legal and on time. So yeah, just campaign for those email addresses and make sure you have as many, if not all of them in Vantaca if possible. Cool. There's also your service provider insurance action item. I'll send you guys an article on that whenever I send our follow-up email. It's a great way for your team to track those. So that is so this is a really great article that's just going to walk you guys through that action item and how it functions, and just to make sure that you guys have it set up. So I will be sending that out as well. Also under service providers, their insurance screen is here. So you just select the insurance screen and then just go through and pick the correct provider. And you can add those insurances here by adding new insurance, selecting the type, and then just adding all the information if it's required by you guys or not. Also, your service provider documents is where that COI is going to live. So right under here, you would just add a new document within that folder under COI within the general liability, umbrella, or workers' comp. And then also 1099s are under here and W-9s are under your service provider documents as well. Something else interesting is going to be that service provider payment method. So if their preferred payment method is auto draft, you would want to make sure that you have their account and routing information and their remittance email address if it is not the same that is on their contact info. And then so you can have them set up to auto draft their payment whenever you have those invoices. Or let's say you have like an old school association that is like, nope, we absolutely do not want to do ACH payment. We want to always do a check. You can set up an exception and add a new association. So let's say Fantastic COA only wants to pay their vendors via check. You can have that set up. So it will keep that on file for you until you change it. Awesome, guys. There's some other really good service provider articles that I think will be very useful to you guys over time, especially as you're getting everything set up and ready for go live. So I encourage just taking a look at those articles that I send out as well. But aside from that, if you guys don't have any questions, we are all done for today. I appreciate you all spending some time with me, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but I'll hang out for a few minutes, make sure we don't have any lingering questions, and you're free to go.